Does the EU need its own spies? The EU Justice Commissioner thinks Europe needs its own Central Intelligence Office as a counterweight to the NSA. But the legal and political obstacles are significant, says experts, and would it even be worth it? Viviane Reding, the European Union's Justice Commissioner, was in incapable mood when she spoke to Greek newspaper Neftemporiki on Monday. Asked to comment on Edward Snowden's revelations about U.S. National Security Agency's activities, particularly the mass surveillance of EU citizens' data, Reding suggested it was time Europe pushed back. What we need is to strengthen Europe in its field, so we can level the playing field with our U.S. partners. Reding went on to make a concrete proposal. I would therefore wish to use this occasion to negotiate an agreement on stronger secret service cooperation among the EU member states, so that we can speak with a strong common voice to the US, she said. The NSA needs a counterweight. My long-term proposal would therefore be to set up a European intelligence service by 2020. There was obviously a political point in the notion as much as a practical one, perhaps a rhetorical exercise to assert European power. One EU official asserted that EU Observer website that Reding had spoken off the cuff, and had not yet discussed her idea with fellow commissioners. Europe's disadvantage. Reding's partially veiled anger is understandable, given that the NSA allegedly spied on several EU leaders, EU offices both in Brussels and elsewhere, and on EU citizens. There's a perception among European bureaucracy that Europe is a disadvantage, said Nigel Inkster, director of transnational threats and political risks at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and a former British Secret Intelligence Service official. So, when Europe wants to exercise invalidate over America on issues of this kind, it can't do so through the same mechanism. Its only option is to do so through legislation around issues like data protection. The proposal for a European Intelligence Agency is not new. The idea was first mooted after the Madrid train bombings in 2004, when the governments of Australia and Belgium called for an EU-wide agency to pool counter-terrorist intelligence. That idea was duly cold-shouldered by France, Germany, and the UK, partly because of the daunting political problems involved. For one thing, it would require a comprehensive revision of the Lisbon Treaty, which currently says clearly that security is a national concern. At the end of the day, intelligence collection is almost the supreme expression of national sovereignty, said Inkster. It is quintessentially national in its purpose and intent. Intelligence nightmares. There are plenty of reasons why major European countries would not want to share information with their smaller neighbors, pointed out Paul Schwartz, former defense official in the British government and senior associate with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. who would agree to have their national information flow fed into some multinational pool, he told DW. Would they be able to keep agents? Would they be able to keep budgetary appropriations? You get free rider problems immediately. Scholz also suggested that the perennial problems hang over intelligence and national security issues, dealing with parliamentary oversight. The threat of leaks would only be complicated by keeping a centralized office. That's a nightmare of intelligence officials. Every time you share something, you risk its usefulness being devalued, because the message gets out that you know this, said Scholz. So you have to think about the pretty hideous problems of credibly maintaining confidentiality amongst 28 member states, some of which may not have the highest standards of counterintelligence and internal security. If it's not broken, Europe already maintains some central information sharing organizations. The EU Intelligence Analysis Center, EUINTCEN, provides intelligence analysis to EU High Representative Catherine Ashton and to the European External Action Service, while counterterrorism specialists meet regularly within the U.S. Council's Working Group CP931. On top of that, there are bilateral intelligence sharing forums outside the EU structure, such as the Club de Brune, an organization within which the EU's 28 members share their secrets voluntarily. Other international organizations operate by the same loose principles. We've got this into NATO. Everyone gets some information, but there are a great many things held back by individual governments or shared only on an inner circle basis, said Scholz. If you try and formalize this, and say this must be EU-wide, it's not going to happen. There will be some formal acknowledgments and some cosmetic high-profile sharing, but the real crown jewels are still going to be jealously guarded. For it to constitute an improvement, you'd have to have a lot more harmonization of a lot of arrangements within Europe, including different legal systems, said Inkster. A European intelligence service, if one were to be established, would necessarily take time to bed down and develop anything like the capabilities that already exist. U.S. rights groups push for the declassification of counterterrorism documents. The official's legal rationales for U.S. drone strikes and NSA surveillance programs remain classified. A growing number of advocacy groups are calling on the White House to come clean about its counterterrorism programs. U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan have killed at least 400 civilians, according to NGO and Pakistani government sources cited by Amnesty International. Meanwhile, National Security Agency surveillance programs have collected thousands of communications from American citizens, in violation of the U.S. Constitution's prohibition against unreasonable search and seizure. Despite the growing evidence of widespread collateral damage from Washington's counterterrorism programs. The authoritative legal rationales for drone strikes and the NSA's collection of metadata remain classified. Last week, 45 national security and transparency organizations signed a letter, published by openthegovernment.org, calling on U.S. President Barack Obama to make secret interpretation of U.S. law available to the public. We're not asking for the classified details of operations. We understand the need to keep those secrets when there are people to be protected or sources and methods. Patrice McDermott, the executive director of openthegovernment.org, told DW. But McDermott said the public needs to understand how the law is being expanded and interpreted in secret opinions and secret memos. Although public pressure on the U.S. government is mounting, particularly in the aftermath of the leaks by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden, transparency advocates still face an uphill battle in the U.S. judicial system. The White House has been very successful at convincing courts that it has the authority to basically keep all components of its counterterrorism program classified. Andrew Pausel, senior counterterrorism counsel with Human Rights Watch, HRW, told DW. Secret casualty figures. In the report published on October 22, Amnesty International accused the U.S. of launching drone strikes in Pakistan that may have resulted in unlawful killing that constitute extrajudicial executions or war crimes. In a separate investigation of drone strikes in Yemen, HRW also concluded that international law was violated, saying that at least 57 civilians had died in 6 strikes between 2009 and 2013, which is investigated. State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf disputed the casualty numbers presented by Amnesty and HRW, claiming that there's a wide gap between U.S. assessments of such casualties and non-governmental reports. Harf added that the U.S. government's figures are more accurate. They don't have, of course, access to all of the information from classified sources and methods that the intelligence community would that we use in terms of evaluating the number of civilians casualties, she said. But according to Harf, the government cannot release its casualties figures because it has to protect those sources and methods. Amnesty and HRW have criticized this secrecy, saying it prevents the public comparison of any discrepancy. We need to know how many people have been killed, what their identities are, and what the legal justification for these killing was. Nurulin Shah, advocacy advisor with Amnesty International USA, told DW. Classified presidential policy guidance. The White House has claimed that the drone program complied with both international and domestic U.S. law. In a speech at the National Defense University last May, Obama said he only approves drone strikes when there is near certainty that civilians will not be harmed. Obama went on to say that he had signed a so-called presidential policy guidance that contained tough restrictions on drone strikes, but that document has never been released to the public. The U.S. government has provided blank assurance. It has made generalizations, but it has never explained the legal and factual basis for particular killings, said Shaw, who co-authored Amnesty October 22 report. So far, attempts to get secret legal opinions on the drone program declassified have failed. The New York Times newspaper and the American Civil Liberties Union (ACLU) filed a lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) to have relevant documents released to the public. But U.S. District Court Judge Colleen McMahon ruled in January that under current law she could not require the Obama administration to disclose secret documents related to the drone program. The administration asserts state secrets privilege or lack of jurisdiction at almost every opportunity, said Prosor with Human Rights Watch. It is true that the courts at this point have not provided an avenue of recourse. Courts reluctant to challenge NSA. Amnesty filed a lawsuit against another key component of the administration's counterterrorism policy, mass surveillance by the National Security Agency. Amnesty claimed that its works have been adversely affected by the NSA's expanded surveillance, because it was forced to beef up the security of its communications with contacts overseas who are likely monitored by the U.S. But in February, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Amnesty's claim was based too much on speculation and therefore did not have standing in court. According to legal expert Mark Rumold, the courts are wary about intruding on national security because it has been particularly delegated to the executive branch through the Constitution. Courts have maybe given too much leeway to the executive branch to do what they will in the national security context, and there's growing momentum to kind of rein in what the executive has done, said Rumold, a staff attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation (EFF), a transparency advocacy group based in San Francisco. The Snowden effect. But the leaks by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden have created momentum towards declassification. According to Rumold, in terms of what the leaks have done, at least in terms of the cases I work on, they fundamentally changed my cases, he said. In August, an EFF lawsuit resulted in the publication of a previously classified Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court (FISC) ruling. According to the FISC ruling, the NSA had violated the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable search and seizure by incidentally collecting internet metadata of thousands of people in the United States. In September, the EFF won another lawsuit against the U.S. Justice Department. forcing the disclosure of hundreds of previously classified documents on the NSA's surveillance activities. In response to public pressure, the Obama administration has also released a summary of its overall legal interpretation of the NSA surveillance programs. But according to Rumode, a summary does not go far enough. We need to have access to a branch of government that says what the law is, and that in this instant the courts, Rumode said. And the public wants to have a meaningful debate about how to amend the law to prevent this, or if the public decides this is something that we want, the public needs to be able to know how to ratify the decision. China awaits signs of reform from Beijing. Big plans are expected to be announced at China's upcoming third plenary sessions of the Communist Party Central Committee. The sessions will also be an indication of party chief Xi Jinping's effectiveness in office. China might be soon implementing a wave of reforms. There has been speculation that far-reaching reforms will be announced at the upcoming third plenum of the Communist Party (CPC) Central Committee from November 9 to 12. The State Council's Development Research Center, a government think tank, has presented a white paper on reforms which could set the tones of the upcoming meeting. The suggestions are aimed at 8 areas from finance and foreign trade to land usage rights and questions about social welfare and taxation. The underlying tone of the paper seems to be more market, less state. Yuan as a world currency? One of the goals in the reform roadmap is to turn the renminbi into a world currency within the next decade, one that is not only used in trade and investment, but also as an international reserve currency. Professor Doris Fisher of Wittenberg University says this aim is not completely new, nor is it fundamentally unrealistic. But at the same time, she does not think the People's Republic is quite ready for it. Whether the Chinese yuan is accepted as a world currency, whether it will become a reserve currency for other countries, that depends on what other countries have to say. And, of course, it also depends on how the Chinese economy develops and foreign trust therein, the China expert told DW. She said Chinese banks were not yet ready for international financial markets. Before the Chinese currency could become fully convertible and freely exchanged, there would first have to be far-reaching reforms. She said the main state-owned banks were comparable to massive tankers that are not prepared for the choppy water of international competition, having been protected by the state for so long. It is excited that the recent established Shanghai Free Trade Zone will become a laboratory for experiments for the convertibility of the yuan. But it is not clear if and to what extent the yuan can freely exchange there. It seems as though China is following one of its traditional idioms, crossing the river by filling the stones. Opposition from established interest groups. This timid approach could also be applied to the breaking of states' monopolies in rail, energy, and telecommunications. The white paper suggests increasing competitions in these sectors through a control process. Fisher is skeptical whether the country's new leadership is strong enough to implement the suggestions. There are people, entire groups of people even, who profit from the current setup of the system. The demands are far-reaching, but if they will be implemented any time soon, I don't think that is very likely. She said there is likely to be less oppositions to reform in the welfare and public services system. All sides seem to agree this needs to be reformed. The growing gap between rich and poor is leading to social tension. Many Chinese, especially in rural areas, were not able to profit from the country's great economic boom. Land reforms and social security card. Good news for farmers? The government think tank's white paper also stipulate land reform that will allow farmers to collectively sell their land. Plots of land that are disappropriated by the government should in future be paid for at market value. Chinese economist Cao Xiyuan thinks this is a good start. Why do the farmers lead miserable lives? Because they cannot extract any value from their land, Gao told DW. Up to now, authorities have paid very little to farmers for their land before selling it off to real estate companies and at exorbitant prices. If farmers were adequately compensated for their losses, he said, it could ease tensions tied to expropriations. A further suggestion for reform goes along with the planned abolition of the so-called hukou or ID system, which requires all Chinese citizens to register their places of residency with the authorities. The system literally divides urban from rural population. Those who migrate from the countryside to cities in search of work find themselves marginalized. People can only receive welfare or public services, for example, school education or medical care, in the cities or towns documented in their hukous. For China's 200 million migrant workers, this is an enormous problem. Now the government think tank is suggesting the creation of a countrywide social security system in which each citizen can receive benefits anywhere in its country. Nothing to indicate reform towards democracy. Which of the think tank's suggestions will be implemented to what extent has yet to be seen. But one thing for certain is that one of the white paper's authors, Li Lu He, is a close economic advisor to party and state head Xi Jinping. Cao Xiyuan, who worked for the State Council's Development Research Center in the 1980s and later founded his own think tank, was critical of the fact that there is no discernible effort to implement reforms which would promote democracy and rule of law. Political and economic reforms are like two legs. If you only move the one leg and a step forward and drag the another behind, you will fall.